Today, we'll be looking at full depravity and how God gives us over to our desires when we don't seek God. We'll be looking at it in the first chapter of the book of Romans. We will be finishing the first chapter of the book of Romans, the 26th through the 32nd verses. So, grab a Bible, grab a cup of coffee if you'd like, and let's get to it. So in the first chapter of Romans, as we conclude, and as we've seen from yesterday and the day before, or from the previous days that we've done this study, we see that for those who seek God, they will find God and find more. And for those who know God but abandon God, God allows them to go that route. So the author of Romans, Paul, drives that home even further in the text today. He writes, starting in the 26th verse, "Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lust. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. Furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind, so that they do what ought not to be done. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. Although they know God's righteous decrees, that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but also approve of those who practice them." Again in the text today, there is so much going on, so much that we could dig into, that for these short 5 to 10 minute devotions, there's just not enough time to really dig into these verses. There's a lot going on here. A couple of the big points are those, again, who knew God. As we see towards the end here, Paul redefines it in verse 32. Although they know God's righteous decrees, that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these things, but also approve of those who practice them. We see Paul redefine what he's getting at in these verses in this section, that it's those who knew the truth of God, those who had God in their hearts and traded it for a lie, those who knew God's decrees and knew that God's way was life. In verse 28, he says, they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God. So God gave them over to a depraved mind so that they would do what they ought not to do, which also implies that they had the knowledge of God. They knew the knowledge of God. They had a life and a relationship with God, but they thought it not worthwhile to retain. To retain would suggest they have, and they chose not to keep. They chose to give it away. They chose not to retain it. So God gives them over. God's wrath in this section is towards those who have the knowledge of God, those who know God, who have a relationship with God, who have the knowledge and righteousness of God, but choose not to continue going with it. Choose to give it up, choose to ignore it, choose to abandon their relationship with God. God gives them over to the depravity of their mind, so that their mind was already depraved. That's already there in their mind, in their hearts. God just allows them to continue going that way because they chose not to follow. That happens with us. I mean, we see the list, and And so often this text has been used to speak against homosexuality in the church, but that I struggle with it a lot because I'm not sure that this is really even the point or the focus of this text at all. It's here that it says women exchange natural for unnatural, men exchange natural for unnatural. They're inflamed with lust for one another. It is there. It does say that. But we see that in this section, the point is trading the truth for a lie, trading what you already have for something else. That the context here is that the wrath of God is directed towards those who trade what they already have for something else, for lusting after other things. And it's contained within this list too of gossips, slanderers, God haters, arrogant, boastful, always looking to do evil, disobeying parents, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. It's trading mercy, trading love, trading understanding, trading humility, and all of these things for the opposites. It's what they already had. They already had God's righteousness. They already had a relationship with God. So in that context, and I'm not sure, I'm not positive, a lot of times when we read scripture, it leaves us with more questions than answers. And so for me, when I read through this section that women trade sexual relations that are natural for unnatural and men for the same, the section that hits me is they were inflamed with lust for one another, and that this section is about trading what we already have for something less than. So I'm lent to believe that Paul is writing to the people in Rome saying, you already are married. You already have a relationship with a man with a woman or a woman with a man. You already have a relationship. And those who are being given over to sinful and lustful desires are those who are lusting for something beyond their relationship, who are lusting for something outside of what they already have. And so they are trading what they already have to go after lustful desires. And so I don't know that, at least in Romans, at least in this section, in these verses, because that's all we're looking at today, at least in this section, in these verses, I don't know that Paul's even really talking about homosexuality. Not just to say homosexuality the way we see it today or the way that our culture views it nowadays, but really his point is about trading what we have right now for other things that aren't as full or life-giving. And that's why we have this list as well of envy, murder, strife, deceit, gossip, slander, God haters, arrogant, boastful, no mercy, and no love. Because it's trading what they have for this other. And it's trading the truth of a life in God, a truth in the relationship with God. It's trading that relationship for lies, for things that aren't God. That's what this section's about, is that the wrath of God in verse 18, the wrath of God being revealed is that God gives over to the desires that already exist within us. The desires to pull away from what we have in God. So it's not about that. It's not about what our minds want to immediately go to in this section. What it's really about is Paul saying there's two paths. There's the path there's two paths for everyone who know God and have a relationship with God. Either you continue in that relationship and push on towards God in faith and in righteousness and you will find more. Or you trade it and abandon it for something that isn't real or isn't as beautiful and lovely as God. You trade it for something that is less than God. He's saying that the people who have traded God's goodness, God's righteousness, God's love, the people who have abandoned that and traded that, as it said, they didn't think it was worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, to retain that relationship with God. For those of us who don't work on our relationship with God, we're given over to all of these things. I mean, I think that's how we can see in the church when people are angry in the church, when people gossip in the church, when people slander in the church, when people are filled with deceit in the church or envy in the church, when people in the church are arrogant or boastful, when people in the church do evil or disobey their parents, or they have no understanding or no mercy, no fidelity or no love, when that happens in the church, I think the reason it happens is because the people that are doing that are not constantly giving themselves over to God daily. They're not constantly trying to seek after the righteousness of God. Because as we saw in verse 16 and 17 of the first chapter, for those who seek God, for those who continue in faith, continue in righteousness, and work on it daily, God will reveal more to them. They will follow more into that. But for those who don't do that, for those who know God, who have the truth of God in their heart, those who are already in the church, who have God in their heart, who don't follow God every day, who don't work on their relationship with God, they are given over to the evils of this world, to the desires that already exist within our heart and within our minds. Those evil desires are there. I've felt them for myself. I know what my sins and my temptations are. I know what I'm tempted daily to do. And if I don't try to work on my relationship with God each day, if I don't try to work on my faith and my righteousness in God every day, then I'm going to be tempted even harder to pull into those things and to just sit in a life following the bad desires of my heart that just lead to death and destruction. And so really, in this first chapter, the whole first chapter of Romans, one of the big things I see is that Paul is setting up two categories for those who already know God, already are in the church, already are believers. Those who are called and are believers, who are baptized, who are Christ followers. For those of us who are Christ followers, either we continue following Christ, trying to be like Christ every day and finding more, or we abandon that and are given over to the desires, the evil desires of our hearts. That's the point here. That's the focus here, is on those who know God, who are in the church, who are already believers. That's you. That's me. If you're already a believer of God, already a believer of Christ, that's the focus. The focus is on you, not anyone else, not anyone outside the church, not anything that's going on in the world, but on the believer. And whether or not the believer is continuing to follow God daily, or whether they are abandoning that and being given over to the evil feelings and thoughts of their life. So I hope God adds a blessing to your understanding today. I hope the Spirit speaks to your spirit today and you hear what God wants to say to you. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thank you for watching.